Bonsoir. Hello. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the NFB. So I want to say first, Arskenornia Ishis. So that's the greeting in the Wendat language. Simply means, are you in peace? So I think that's a nice greeting. Hoping that everyone is in peace inside of themselves, because the world is not in peace. So it is an honor to be with these two great filmmakers. So anyone who's involved with cinema in Canada, with documentary filmmaking, and with Indigenous politics, culture, history, has been deeply influenced by the work of Alanis at some point in their life or career. And Jeff has brought an incredible new voice into that landscape of Indigenous film in Canadian.
Newish.
Newish. Newer. So I propose that we start right away by looking at images and then our filmmakers.
It should be noted that I make very violent movies, so that child up there might go online watching what we're about to show. So I'm all for traumatizing little kids with horror films. I've just showed my kid The Predator. But I'm warning you. I don't know what he's going to show, but there's chainsaws and decapitations, and that's like entry level.
There's not going to be violence or drugs in the
Right.
in the first clip.
Good.
It's good to be reminded. There should be warning for the later clips that will come on. So we'll first watch a short clip from Christmas at Moose Factory, a film which Alanis directed in 1971.
In 19 what?
This is a wonderful idea of storytelling. Tell us about it, how you came to that, to use children's drawing and their voices.
Well, first of all, my main interest from the very beginning was children. Having had a pretty bad life at that time, when you're in it, you don't know what's happening. You just don't know. Like, it just happens. But as I came to getting a little bit older and understanding how this happens, how come you get beat up all the time? How come people hate you so much? And then I really figured out it was the books in the school that was being taught to children, very well designed in advance to make sure that we were known as savages, as people who went around scalping the poor white man who came here. We were morons, we didn't have religion, and all those things. So, I was the only Indian in the classrooms. whenever she opened the book Histoire du Canada, I knew I was going to get beat up that day. But then I figured out
I'm sorry to laugh.
how come this is happening. And once I understood that it was the way you were teaching children. So I thought, children have to hear another story. And that's how I revolted. By the time I was 14, I was a real devil, like I tell you. I wasn't get beat up anymore. And so I learned, and we're now at such a different time. Those things don't exist anymore. Those books are out of there. Thank God for that. Our people are so rich. Like, we have books, we have films, we have art, we have everything, discipline, name it, we have it today. And it is possible for our people to exercise it and be welcome. It's very new. And in every institution in Canada, there is a space, a place, where there is actually funds to encourage people, no matter if they're indigenous, no matter what discipline they wish to go into. I'm 89 years old. I am so grateful that I have lived this long to see the difference. Because where we're going now, we've never been there before. I am telling you that. So, all this, excuse me if I say the word shit, that was so bad for...
I warned you.
For so many... What's your name again? Was so bad. And now, we can tell our people, don't worry, there's a place for you. Don't be intimidated by coming into the Film Board, Telefilm Canada, CBC, no matter where. There's a space for you. And people respect you, and you're beautiful. And I am so thankful to be able to say this. Away. He's handsome, eh?
Jeff, did you have any thoughts as you saw this early Alanis?
Let's leave it on I'm handsome. It's kind of interesting because people talk about the context of Alanis's films as a director and the messages she brings to the zeitgeist. But for me, I look at a lot of her aesthetic, like her filmmaking techniques, and oddly enough, this is where I started getting the idea of juxtaposing animation with normal film, whatever that means. And it's wild to think that some 60 odd years ago, or however long it was, that she had this idea in her head, and it transferred over the decades into what I was doing, and it just kind of morphed into this different thing by virtue of osmosis and your own creativity. And you talk about legacy, and I think what we do as filmmakers is create this cultural legacy. And what I love about Alanis's films is that she drags modern views of Native people into the present tense. Whereas we were just talking about this. We were kind of talking about, what she went through was nothing compared to what I went through, but we were both kind of commiserating over the fact that everybody kind of thought we don't exist anymore. Like, I've heard phrases like, I thought all the Indians were dead and stuff like that. So it's interesting, but she was the first one that taught me that you could take a film and you could turn it not only into this cultural touchstone, but also have it be a voice of protest. And that got instilled into me when I was still in my single digits. By the time I was 9, I'd already started watching Alanis's film Incident at Restigouche because that's the reserve that I grew up on. And I think from that point on, I was through, I don't know, legacy, I guess. I was a little Hellraiser too. By the time I was 9 years old, I was already stirring the shit, as it were. And it's exactly what she set out to do, was create a child that didn't look at their history and their culture as this malignant kind of ugly thing. And it's interesting, that film, it inspired not just me, but it inspired the whole community to start looking into their culture more, start language revitalization. We ended up getting a school there. We ended up kind of like fighting and starting controlling our resources. Everything that we just talked about up until this point, all the kind of inspiration and everything that was planted within my community by that film. What was the question?
Doesn't matter. We'll go to a second clip. By the way, didn't want to know which clips in advance we're going to show, so we can just react. So the second clip would be kind of going to part of your route, Jeff, as a filmmaker. We could see a reflection of many things in it, of you as a filmmaker and where you're from in terms of your community. So you can tell us more about this scene from Rhymes for Young Ghouls. So it says you can turn anything into an art form, and then it shows craftiness, and you kind of depict different types of people, maybe, that you grew up with. So.
Oh, absolutely. That entire film is littered with my family members and friends, and there's so many things. Like, I don't know if anybody's seen the film, but the opening scene where the young girl Ayla runs over the kid, that I lived at. The scene where she gets up in the morning and she's picking out all the pockets of the people that are passed out there. I used to do that when I was a kid. So a lot of that stuff came out when I was writing this film, and the reason why I wanted to do it, because I'd never seen it before. Like, everybody does films what I refer to as sanitized for white consumption. And a lot of the time, what you're battling against is perception. People went from viewing natives as savages, and then like the hippies took over in the 70s and the 60s, and then all of a sudden we became flower children. And you're fighting those stereotypes. Like, I didn't recognize any of the people in those movies. So for me, it was a matter of throwing those res rats up on screen, because those are the people that I grew up around. And that's what I knew and understood. And again, it ties back to Alanis's films, because those, like, everybody talks about growing up on a res and like, oh, I never seen Indians on screen, but I had the exact opposite experience because of Alanis's films. Everybody, like my grandfather's in that film, Son Annette. So anytime I feel nostalgic about home, I just need to slap that movie on. And I see all the people that I grew up around. I see the places that I grew up around. And I think one of the things about being an Indigenous filmmaker is the land that you're filming on matters. It's kind of weird to say, but it's true. And Alanis recorded 270 Years of Resistance on the reserve that I shot Rise for Young Ghouls on, and Blood Quantum, actually. So it ended up being quite a almost spiritual experience, which is kind of trite to say, but if you've ever gone through a film, it is a slog and a war, and you are a changed individual by the end of it. So this was kind of like that. This was actually the easiest shoot I've ever done. And Devery was amazing, and it was just a matter of capturing that res vibe that I had never seen on screen, and really still haven't seen it captured quite the way that I experienced it. Again, sanitized for white consumption. I didn't want to do that. It was kind of like, I want to present the damage that you've done and see what you guys say about it. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to antagonize everybody.
What?
Well, that's interesting. It makes me think of things Cree poet Billy Ray Belcourt writes about sometimes when he says, I'm torn between wanting exposure and not wanting to be digestible for the white audience.
This is a real problem. I don't know how Alanis feels about it. I'd be kind of curious to hear what she says, but you're, as a Native person operating in a system that has almost been designed to make you look like a savage, because you look at the early films, westerns. I mean, it was always the Native that was the villain, and you do that kind of to assuage your colonial guilt. And it wasn't even a phrase back then. Like, nobody even knew what it was. But I think the culture inherently knew that you know, to put it bluntly, you're commodifying a genocide. That's what you're doing. You're taking this genocide and you're like, now that we've stripped all these people of their resources and their culture, how can we exploit it further to make money? And it's like, all right, let's throw some logos on some, whatever. Pick something, cars, football teams, baseball teams, whatever. So to villainize us is to make us expendable. And that's what film was. So you're operating as a Native person in that same space, actively using the same methods that have villainized you all these years as a means to kind of expunge that, or to at least counteract it. But at the same time, you're asking yourself the question, am I myself commodifying the same genocide by using the same means that we made it okay with? So this is something that drives me crazy constantly. Like, I don't know how to consummate the idea of making money with loving and expending and expanding and exposing my culture to other Mi'kmaq people and to other Native people and to non-Native people. I don't really know how to do it. It drives me fucking crazy, to be blunt. I don't know how to fix it, and I suppose I can just write poetry for the rest of my days, but I really love film, and it's always that struggle of, well, I have this vision of a zombie apocalypse. How am I going to raise the, $10 million that we needed to do it? And we didn't, and we raised half that money, and we sacrificed the rest with our spirit and souls. That movie took a lot out of us, man. And making Indigenous films takes a lot out of you. I don't think it's quite as bad as it was when Alanis was working, where they were literally telling her not to interview white people But I think there's still this kind of de facto gate there where you still need to kind of entertain that idea of sanitizing your content for non-native consumption, because there's a commercial aspect there to it. And nobody wants to see drunk Indians pass out on the table. But, you know, I don't know anything else.
Well, we'll talk about the film that Alanis made in your community, and then we'll make connection with Blood Quantum as well. So Alanis also was challenging the Quebec audience with that film and went through troubles to make it. We'll first watch a short excerpt from an incident at Restigouche. So, Alanis, if you want to tell us a bit about the difficulties of making that film, because it shows how things have changed since we're sitting in the Alanis Obomsawin Theatre, and at that time, no one would have
Can you imagine?
named a theater.
Somebody told me, if that person told you you're not allowed to interview white people, she must be turning around in her coffin. That all of a sudden. Oh la la.
Because the film came out in '84, right? So
Yeah.
that's 3 years after the
3
events.
years of fighting here at the board, and in all kinds of ways, including my fist. But just think, finally, when I finally was able to communicate with some people in charge here, and the film, I could finally finish it. It never came out until 1984. Then I have to tell you, my life changed at the film board. Because all of a sudden, people who were, I guess, ignoring me or against me, and people who had power realized, you see, that's the power of film. Realized that what I was doing was important, and this person said, Alanis, I'm going to help you. And I'm telling you, it became a very different life here for me. Because previously to that, first of all, I had to go and raise money. The film board gave me zero, nothing. I had to go and raise money, and the film board would match what I would be able to get. And the only place you could go to raise money for me, because of the situation of the National Film Board, it's a federal institution, I could only go to the federal government to ask for money. And you feel like asking, like it's a big favor, and it's just so awful when I think of that time. But today, like I love the film board. Like it's helped me so much all these years. Although all the misery is what you have to understand, that institution, and I think even in the private sector, institution, every person who works in this institution has power. And you're coming in, you're new. They can make you feel like shit, or they can make you feel welcome, or, and it's individually. It's different people who have different powers in different sections of an institution can make it easy for you or hell for you. It takes a while to understand that. So when I say, like in 1984, my life really changed here. And the support that I have received, and it's just been incredible. So much so, with all the fighting, and there's a place for our people to come here. Not only the Film Board, Telefilm Canada, CBC, all the institutions. There's a space, there's money for Indigenous discipline, no matter what it is. It was not like that when I came in here, So it just goes to show you that now, as I travel around Canada, all across this country, in the 60s, do you think they care? I was touring, I was singing all over Canada, many hundreds of schools, residential school at that time, and every place I went to, a residential school, people would say, you know what, Alanis, there's a cemetery here, and it's unknown, and children some of them have been killed, and terrible. And we talked about it, but nobody was listening. That's the difference today. I want to tell you that how grateful I am. I'm 89 years old, that I can witness the change. And people are caring all across this country. I'm not saying that everything is perfect, it's not true, but there's a lot of good things happening. There's a lot of good people everywhere, and they're listening to you. You have the impression they're so curious. All of a sudden, they want to know. And when we were punished because we were speaking our language, now it's being taught at the university level, different language, in high school, in the community. There was a law in the province of Quebec when the French government became the separatist government was in power. You were only allowed to teach 2 hours a week a different language than French. So a lot of people went by this law in the communities. That was the law. But some of them, starting with Kahnawake, they said, go to hell. We'll decide how many hours we're going to teach our language to our students, and the history, and who we are, and the culture, and the tradition. And that has given a lot of power to our people. And not only that, but not only you're not begging to exist. So it is a good time now. Everything is possible. That's what I keep telling our young people. If you think, go into your heart. If you want, doesn't matter what you want to be. If it's honest and a purpose, it's going to help you or our people or children, you can make it. Don't come there dishonest or playing some kind of games. But if that is real, everything is possible. And can you imagine I'm still living? I can watch this. It's rich. I'm so happy. A little while ago, I went to Le Parvis, to wait for these guys who never showed up. I was there at 5. I thought I had to be there by 5. And there's a place for 4, and I'm alone, and I'm sitting there. I said, I might as well have a drink. So I'm having a drink. I said, better not have 2. So they were not getting in there. So I called Michael. I said, Michael, did I make a mistake? I'm all alone here. It's 5:15. Oh, he says it's at 5:30. I said, oh, okay. But I sat there. I was watching at the Parvis here. It's very close to here. These young people, it was 2 girls on that side, 2 girls and then a couple, and I was just looking at them. They're so beautiful. I thought, what beautiful young kids, aren't they beautiful? All these girls and these boys, and I said, I'll have a drink on that. Yeah. You gotta keep your sense of humor, otherwise c'est plate à mort.
Well, in talking about language and kids, Jeff, I don't know how old you were when you came across this film.
It was like it flooded the reserve. Like everybody had a copy of it.
Oh, okay.
And we'd watch it all the time. Do I remember the first time I seen it? No, because I was there during the raids, so it's kind of interesting. I don't know if anybody's ever shot a film before, but when you shoot a film and you get back on set, or you get back from the set and you're kind of in reality, you have a tendency to look at TV shows and not look at the TV show, but think about all the people behind the camera. So that was my experience watching that film, was thinking about everything that was going on behind the camera. And I think, again, it was like the permutations of where I ended up going as a director. But I remember the helicopters in the sky. I was staying in Cross Point at the time, so we were like dead center in the middle of all of it. And I had my Superman pajamas on with a little hole in the underarm and the burn mark from the I remember it just burned into my brain. It's like I kind of joked about that kid going online seeing the violence. That's kind of what happened to me. I went online seeing the violence. It's my first memory. The raid. I was 4 years old. So those were my first memories. And when I watch the film, I don't think about the film as a art form. I think about it almost as a home video, because I recognize everybody in there. Like that clip was Renee Martin. That was one of my friends. He grew up like half a mile away from me by the baseball field down the flat. So for me, it's a walk down memory lane. It's not like this watershed moment in film, even though it is that. For me, like I watch it like 3 times a year. I just watched it the other day, and I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, I should show this to my son, because my son, I wanted to stop the cycle. I grew up in a cycle of degradation and violence, and I wanted to stop it, and alcoholism. So he didn't grow up on the reserve. He grew up in Montreal, and he's loved. He goes to a private school. It's like a completely different experience than what I went through. And I was hesitant to show him the film because I didn't want him to know that French people here thought of Micmac people that way at any one point in time, even if it was 40 years ago. I didn't want him to think that that animosity is there because, you know, I'm at home and I'm like, fucking white people. And my son is like, Dad, stop being racist. And I'm like, all right, this is the world we live in now. So we see this exceptional, I don't know what you'd call it, evolution, where we're starting, I guess you can call it reconciliation, although that's kind of a dirty word. Between you and I, that's kind of a dirty word, native circles. And I guess what we're seeing is those first hesitant steps towards that. And again, for me, I'm torn up because those experiences turn me into who I am. And I'm wondering what I'm depriving of my son, because Alanis and I think, are of the same persona in that we see a line, we're going to step across it. Specifically, if people tell us that we can't. So it's like, watch me. Yeah, watch me do it. So I'm wondering if I'm depriving him of that kind of fighting instinct by not putting him through these hardships, which is a fucked up way of thinking, really, if you stop to think about it. But it's kind of the aftermath of growing up in that environment where it really toughened me up, but at the same time, it kind of made me neurotic and damaged, and I don't want him to go through that. And I know how my mom was raised a lot like Alanis was, where she was like not allowed to do certain things. Bear in mind, natives weren't even allowed to leave the reserve without permission until the 80s. So my mom going to university, learning her language in her 20s, not through her grandmother or her mother, because both of them went to residential school, so they were ashamed of it. So she went to university and got her master's degree in education, learned how to speak Mi'kmaq, came back to the reserve, built a school there where they're now completely moving towards uh, teaching in fluent Mi'kmaq. So I think of all that when I watch that film, and I see that old man like, we're gonna draw an axe, we're gonna draw a line, and we're gonna see if they step across it. I actually put that same sentiment, that same line in Blood Quantum. It's the final scene with the old man where he's like, nobody's gonna cross this line. And that film is 40 years old, and it inspired me to be who I am. And I think it's gonna inspire my son the same way it inspired me. Because even though we don't live there, I go down there quite a lot. And he sees the powwow grounds is where we shot. And he sees that old mill, that old monolith there in Alanis's film, and then he'll see it in my film. Church isn't there anymore, it burned down, but you could see all these landmarks and the land, and it's cataloged there in films going over the course of 40, 50 years, and it's going to be there for these kids, my kids, his kids, and you're creating via film that tradition of oral legacy and carrying on your culture. And the language is in that film, the language is in my film. So you have this capsule, this time capsule. You know, Proto-Algonquin, the film that you see, the Christmas at Moose Factory, that's Proto-Algonquin. That's an Algonquin language, so is Mi'kmaq, and that's 10,000 years old. So you hear a 10,000-year-old language in film. We're talking about like decades here. Like she's 89, I'm 45, and between between the two of us, we have a century of experience. But I think what we're doing is going to carry on for eons, the same way that language has survived all that struggle to show up in her films and show up in mine. I think it's going to be carried on vis-a-vis our work and filmmaking. And much like Alanis, that was my goal. So when I see that film, I think about all the legacy behind it and all the positivity that sprung from it and how it's going to be passed on to my son the way it was passed on to me via Alanis and whoever taught Alanis to be who she is. That'd be
I think
a question I want to ask, honestly. That's so polite of you.
I think that reference is in the next clip we have, which is towards the end of Blood Quantum. So
Yeah.
I think that reference to that drawing the line is in there. So we can watch
And
this.
it's animated the same way Moose Factory was, well, animated.
That's not gin, that's water.
So we can screen the next clip, Blood Quantum.
How badass was that? And that's the legacy that carries on from a 40-year-old documentary. 40, right? Yeah, 40. It was released in 84, so that's an interesting story in and of itself.
For those who don't know fully the context of what happened in '81, we'll watch the next excerpt, which is from Incident at Restigouche, and we were talking about it with Alanis earlier, because I was reminded of what Minister Pierre Dufour, Minister of Forest, said last week about the caribou, that natives should stop complaining because of the caribou's disappearance because they still hunt it. And you should know that Minister of Quebec Fisheries in early 80s said the same thing about the reason why sending the SQ on Mi'kmaq nets was that, well, ecological reason, salmon is depleting, yet the industry was taking tons more than what the community was taking.
Of something like 120 tons more. We're
Yeah.
getting like 9.
Yeah.
There were commercial fishing at the
Yeah,
same
exactly.
time.
Yeah. And it's wonderful how, Anis, you take time in one scene of the film to put out the numbers and say, look, this is what's at stake. So we'll watch another clip from Incident at Restigouche. Well, Alanis, I know you said some things have progressed for the better, but I brought up that quote from the minister last week because other things haven't changed that much, like this idea of exploiting the earth to the bone and then blaming natives for it.
The blaming bit, we're used to it. But I'll tell you something, what's gone incredibly a change for Listigouche, at that time it was called Restigouche, was that now they're in charge of the river. So they went from having the provincial government dictating them, you're going to fish only at certain times, and blaming them, and at the same, just you cross the bridge and they're doing commercial fishing there. You know, you can see it very clearly in the film. So you got to be retarded to believe that, and believe that this, whatever this law or rule is right. And from that time, like as you can see, some people were arrested and beaten, and it was a very terrible experience for the Mi'kmaq people to go through that. Now they're in charge of the river. Excuse me. They are the manager of the very river that Lucien Lessard and René Lévesque at that time. René Lévesque was a friend of mine. And you know, when he organized this, I just was so angry. And some people at the film board, and I was having the hardest time to get money to continue doing the film. And some people, a group of people at the film board said, Alanis, we went to a party the other night. I don't know where, something, there were government people there. And they said, René Lévesque was there. So he said, we were lining up to pick up food. And he said, I said to René Lévesque, did you know that Alanis Obomsawin is making a film on what happened in Restigouche? And apparently René said, oh, fuck! That's so funny. So
We actually have control of the forestry and mining. That reserve is flush.
they're smart, you know, and they hang on. And but you know, at the time that I couldn't go any further, I was coming to the board and fighting for money. Nothing was happening. And then I'd go to a meeting, a political meeting of an association. All the chiefs were there, and Alphonse was there, and I was so embarrassed. And I thought, you must think I'm lying. I kept saying, you know, I'm working at this film. It was 84. It comes out, you know. But then it just goes to show you how different it can be. It's the people in charge. It's people who can help you or hate you. You don't advance. And, you know, in this case, there was this woman. She was really awful to me and representing the board. And she had a lot of power and saying to me, Alanis, you're not going to interview any whites. You interview the Indians. I'm going to send Andy Thompson to... And she did. So here I am on location in Restigouche, and the atmosphere, you could feel it in the air. We didn't know what's going to happen. And I had hired this woman to be my assistant there, a young girl. She said, Alanis, she had a boyfriend on the New Brunswick side. You know, the bridge separated Quebec and New Brunswick. And she says, you know what, my boyfriend told me that they're getting organized on the New Brunswick side, and they're going to come and beat up all those guys who are fishermen and are Mi'kmaq. So I thought, oh my God. And we're just by the river, and we're shooting a scene. And the way she said it was going to happen that night. And I remember the feeling, like all of us, we certainly not going to run away, but it was very scary, because there's going to be another fist fight here. People, she said they're coming, they're a group of guys, and they're coming, they're going to beat up all the guys that are Mi'kmaq, that are fishing. And it was this kind of thing. And in the middle of all this, Andy Thompson, that had been sent to interview the whites, comes over to me. He said, Alanis, I didn't come here to disturb anything. I'm going to go play golf. Let's meet for dinner. So he never, you know, thank God for that. He never said, you know, I'm here to, he didn't want to even be bothered with that. So I was very lucky in that sense, because I thought I'm going to be in another fight with him, who I'm going to talk to. So you can imagine, meanwhile, time goes by, and I invited Lucien Lessard. I managed to get some money, and to come. I'm going to interview him in Montreal. And I went to the airport to meet him, and this reporter that I knew from CBC comes out. He said, Alanis, you better be nice to Lucien Lessard. He lost his election last night. So be nice to him, he's really down. So I said to him, I'm going to take him to lunch. I said, what's your favorite meal? He said, fish. And I don't eat meat or fish. I never had any in my whole life, although my father was a hunter. And so I heard that there was a French restaurant that I used to go to all the time. And I loved the people there, and the food was wonderful. And of course they had fish, and they used to say how good the fish was there. So I take Lucien Lessard to this restaurant. It's a small room, and I start fighting with Lucien Lessard, and I said, "How dare you? You said this to the chief," and I'm just poking him like this, and he's arguing, yeah, but like he does in the film, And it was dead silence in the room. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody knew who I was, and they were listening to us, but we couldn't care less. So anyway, we had a meal, and then we went to my house, and I interviewed him there. And it was very interesting. Roger Rocha was the camera person, and the assistant, I forget his name, but from the French side. And he was like this. He was tapping. He wanted to get into the argument, but he couldn't. And finally, it was over. And it was a very warm, hot day in the summertime. So I said, okay, now we'll have a drink. So somebody went and bought a case of beer, and now we're all drinking beer. And at first, Lucien Lessard, I was so disgusted with him, the way he talked to the chief and condescending to him and telling him, who do you think you are, asking for a sovereignty? You got to have your culture, your land, in your language. Yeah. Saying this to Alphonse Metallic. They had to have a translator because Lessard didn't speak English and Alphonse didn't speak French. So there was a person who was translating. And I thought that was so awful. And then, I thought, whoever voted for this guy to have this job as the Minister of Fisheries? And as we talked after, I said, well, they told him, don't go there, she's going to make mince meat out of you. He told me that people told him that. He came. And then I started respecting that fact. I said, he has his way of thinking, he's fighting for the way, whatever. I'm fighting for something else. And at the end, I started trying to understand him. But first, oh my goodness, it was like...
I would have asked him where he got that coat from.
Huh?
The one with the short sleeves. He looked like he just stepped out of like a 90 an 80s sitcom about the future.
It was very difficult to...
That was a mind-boggling interview. Watching it even was like, holy shit. You had to figure he had no idea what he was walking into. That's what I thought anyway, because I was looking at it, I was like, how the fuck did she get him to agree to do this?
He got the wrong Indian.
Yeah. He walked into a buzzsaw.
Being mindful
and you
of...
know what? Lately, just a couple of weeks ago, somebody says to me, he was interviewed. I was worried that I don't want to ask about him. What if he died?
Yeah,
I'm always worried when you talk. Yeah, I have friends. It seems to be for millions of years, and I say, I look and say, I'm gonna call, and then I'm scared. What if this person doesn't exist anymore? Because can you imagine? I still exist, So there's all those feelings that comes through. And someone told me just a few weeks ago that Lucien Lessard was interviewed. He's still alive and he's still living up north. And he was interviewed, and somebody apparently said, don't you, something in this manner, because I didn't hear it myself, don't you think that you were forceful by sending the police like the provincial government did on the Indians, and apparently he said, maybe.
Maybe.
I thought this is a new dialogue. Maybe. Tabarouette.
40 years, you can ring out a maybe.
Well, we can talk a bit more about women's spirit in those fights, and being mindful of time, we'll move ahead in our clips to show clip number 8, please, which is from Ganesatake, 270 Years of Resistance. And then it would be interesting to hear you both about how maybe culture informs resistance, or our resistance like brings back culture, because that's a little interesting bit from Ellen Gabriel in the film. People talk a lot about the political events, but this element of culture and how it informs resistance, I thought was key in that film. So we'll watch a short excerpt from it. So this condenses a lot of things about the role of women and culture and resistance.
It was very traditional and very brave on their parts. And in Kanesatake at that time, there was 2 separate groups. Like you had the band office that you vote in, and you had traditional people. That is a different system. It's very traditional, it's old, and when she says it was our role, the women, to protect the land, in all most of our nations there were clans, and there the clans are very much alive. Like in Odanak, we knew we had some clans, but to say that it's visible and that you use that every day, it's not true. Like it's a memory, and we remember some stories. And in Kahnawake and in Kanesatake, they're very strong in terms of who their clans are, what it represents, and especially the Turtle clan in the Kanyange Haga tradition. It's the woman's clan that has a word. A person who belongs to the Turtle clan can get up anytime with all the clans that are represented by different symbols. Usually it's an animal or a bird, or that it identifies you, which clan you belong to. So when you're talking about the Turtle clan, it's the strongest clan, and it's the clan that the women decide and can get up no matter how many men is talking, you have to respect. And that's what she's talking about. So it was the role of the women to protect the land, and the responsibility, and not to be afraid, and to come, which is what they did, actually, which was a very traditional response and way of being, and taking on, going to the front, even though there's guns everywhere and you don't know, you could get shot or you could get whatever. And they were very strong and not afraid, and that's what they did, what she's talking about.
And
Which-
Jeff,
yeah.
sorry.
which is very beautiful. Like we don't necessarily in all our nations um, have a chance to know their teachings and what we belong to and what is the tradition, and which in this case was so alive and so strong that for white people to see that, whether they want to respect it or not, excuse me, step aside here. It's very strong, and it still exists. And not only that, the fact that they made that stand, all the reserves in Canada, all the communities, every nation has lost land, usually to the next door neighbor who cheats, who takes over and buys it, and all kinds of tricks that happens over generations, and they know what that feels. So this was the same thing in Kanesatake when they were talking about a 9-hole golf course they wanted to take over, and not respecting their cemetery, not respecting that it was their land. It was unbelievable that they could stand with nothing. The women, they carry guns, and make a statement, and coming back to the root of what is land, the respect for it, who you are, who you belong to, the tradition, the trees, what all that means. It was like a different language to the people in charge in Oka. What are you talking about? We want to build some condominiums here. We want to have a larger golf course. And that's where it's about. And, they're still trying to do the same thing even as we're talking now. I don't understand it. How, as a white person, after everything that's happened, if you did get the message, you're going to go and stay in a condominium there? Are you kidding, Kidu? Who wants to, I feel sorry for them. Like, how stupid can you get?
Obviously, you build a condominium on a Micmac burial ground or a Mohawk burial ground, it's going to be haunted. So, what the fuck were they thinking?
And Jeff, two women warrior at the forefront of your two features, and this kind of poisoning of a pregnant woman at the beginning of Blood Quantum. So, how do you relate to these ideas of women protecting the earth and some cultural?
It wasn't an abstraction for me. Like, I didn't experience Native women vis-a-vis screen. Like, they steered my life. My mom was hard, man. My mom was hard. And she had expectations. They were hard to live up to, frankly. And she was a bull in a china shop. And I think I inherited that from her. She is probably the single most intimidating woman I've ever been around in my life. And it wasn't just me. It was with everybody. She was a force. She just died of cancer a year ago. And I'm still absolutely reeling from it.
Is there something else I can help with?
It's a strange timing.
Name of a good therapist. So she was my blueprint, actually, along with Alanis. Like, it's kind of interesting that women in charge is such a new concept to the West. Because for me, it's always been like, it wasn't weird to see a woman Native director in charge, because I've been surrounded by Native women in charge my entire life, so it didn't seem like a weird thing at all. So for me, when making a film about language preservation or or rebellion with Rise for Young Ghouls, it just made sense that it would be a kind of transmogrification of my mom. It was like, when I think about the badass that Ayla is in Rise for Your Ghouls, it goes back to my mom because she was that person. She was the language keeper. She was the teacher. She was the one that kind of kept everybody in line. The men in my family were so broken, so kind of haunted by their demons. I just gravitated towards the women, and that's always been, to this day, it's still the case. And it just made sense. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't like, I'm going to make this feminist movie. It was just what I knew. And that's what you do as an artist, and you're just kind of breaking through. You do what you're most comfortable with. And for me, it was having a powerful female presence in my films, because it was really an homage to Alanis. It was an homage to all the women in my life. And it just felt right. It didn't feel like a concerted, decision that I was going to make this patriarchal film. It was just, the women in my life were strong. And if I was going to make this pseudo superhero film where this character takes down this institutionalized entity that was kind of this representation of cultural degradation and assimilation and all this stuff, it had to be a woman. It just made sense, because I feel like a man would have let himself get carried away with the violence, whereas I felt like a woman would have to outsmart everybody. And that's what she did, because that's real power, knowledge. So it just made sense. It's so weird that I grew up experiencing the things that I did when I did, and they were so anti-establishment to what was going on. Like, I got so lucky, to be honest, to have my mom, to have the influences of Alanis's films, to have my sisters, and to have Devry, who really carried that film on her shoulders. And to speak about the strength of Mohawk women, I mean, it made sense that Devry was Mohawk and coming from that background. And she grew up on a reserve too, and that made a huge difference to me. I wanted people that experienced that space and survived it to transpose that onto the screen. And that's what Devry did. And we were really lucky too, because she lived down the street from my mom's house. So we were able to spend all this time together, just going over the lines, running the lines, filming the lines. So by the time she got on set, she was Ayla. And it was an amalgam of my mom, of all these influences. And it just felt right. It just made sense. And it wasn't, again, I had no idea what I was doing. Like, the reaction it got, I was surprised at how many people related to it. And like, she's kind of a feminist icon now, Ayla. And I didn't really consciously do it. It was just what I knew. Like everything else, it's what I know. It's not, I'm not trying to make any grand statements. I'm just doing what I know. And these women were carved out of metal and bone through real resistance. Like what Alanis is going through, or what she went through to get to where she was, like I've never experienced that. Like, I can't imagine a white producer having the nerve to tell me what I can and can't do on a set. That seems fucking mind-boggling. John's sitting right here. Sorry, John. But he knows exactly what I'm talking about. In that, like, I'm very much that bull in the china shop, and I'm just gonna be what I am. And that's what I was with Rhymes. That's what I was with Blood Quantum. And I think that's what you kind of need to do when you're making Indigenous films, because they're still underfunded. Like when we did Blood Quantum, it was the most expensive Native film ever made, and it was only $5.5 million. I think what's his name was doing another film that was $1 million more, and our film had a fucking special effect in every single shot. And these guys were doing like, you know, people talking at a table, and they got $1 million more. And you have to make that up. Like, they introduced me as being the writer, director, editor, composer. Like, 2 of those roles I had to do because we didn't have the money to pay people. So that's kind of the experience that I went through. I wasn't actively being discouraged. I was actively being underfunded. That's the difference. It's gotten more subtle. So nobody's going to take a 6', 200-pound Indian man and try to tell him what to do, but they'll find other ways to go about undermining the projects. And that's been my experience. And I think John would say the same thing. Like, we didn't get enough money for the films that we were trying to do. And we had to make do. And that's, you know, kind of where we're at now. We've come a long way, but at the same time, there's still a long way to go.
And we're going there.
Yes, we are.
So it is 8:30. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions if
Let's
You want-
dance.
it is a burning question. If
You guys think she's joking, huh?
yeah. Well, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
Lala.
Oh, yeah.
Really want to thank you, you know,
We need a microphone.
contribute and created a space of thinking in a Canadian society. But
Can you talk louder?
They're giving
The
him a
mic,
microphone.
the mic is coming.
Sharing microphone and a plague. That's a great idea.
I want to say, with your work, not only you create a space for thinking among us, but also you really help people like me. You know, I came to this country and we were dealing with issue of atrocity in our country, Islamic government atrocity, etc. And we really didn't have a point of reference, how to look at it, how to explain it. And really what we did, you know, I work at NFP, you know, but we had a library and we were watching films, you know, all film Alanis, you know, it was on VHS, you know, like why they're resisting on the culture, why they resist on the language, you know. And really, I'm so happy that I had a chance, you know, to see people like
You can't hear
fighting,
him well.
fighting, you know, like for some issue which is not in the mainstream culture, you know, and still is like I believe like I wish the story of the indigenous movement films could reach much more in the universal level, you know, in other countries to go there, you know. And I wish the Canada, like we don't have like a cultural center, kind of the council, you know, they present film other country. They could concentrate some on indigenous film and send it to different countries, which they have total different experience, and they be able to use their experiences. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thanks.
Je sais pas pourquoi on peut- C'est une question.
No, it's more a comment about how the work you've done in the Voice of Indigenous People does help for people who come from abroad and have experienced hardship.
Okay.
That's
and-
kind of
and
an
find
interesting
that
point
voice here.
because anywhere you find indigenous people, you're going to find the same issues: language preservation, land preservation, and livelihood. And that's like true in Australia as true as it is here. New Zealand is probably the most progressive, but anywhere you go, indigenous issues are the same, even though the cultures vary so differently. Questions, comments? Go.
I can speak loud. This is for both of you. I'm wondering if you have your eyes on other projects, and if so, what subject are you interested in covering?
Eyes and ears on many other projects. And I just, because we've been working at home for the last 2 years, I did something that I never thought I would do. I decided to listen to my archives that I've been hiding for a lot of years, which means quarter-inch tape sound 40, 50 years ago.
Do you have a Niagara at your house?
I had a Niagara, and I have a Niagara to listen to it. Yeah.
You know, once upon a time, Quebec was the biggest consumer of Niagara tape because of fucking Concordia using those old Bolexes. And we had to edit on the, you'd appreciate this, we had to edit on the Steenbecks, the
Yeah,
old school,
yeah.
real Steenbecks. You guys don't know what you're,
We did.
you had to do it.
Yeah. But the Niagara I adored, because when you were taping with the Niagara, it's the not only the quality but the atmosphere of the area, and the sound is very
Yeah, that's
different than any other machine we had at the time. And I have a Niagara at home now with a lot of other equipment because we've been working at home. So I've been listening to the quarter-inch tapes, and which, you know, you never think of doing it really. Well, one day I started at 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm listening to this tape. I start crying, I'm telling you. 12 o'clock at night, I'm still listening. All these quarter-inch tape, you know what that means. I'm still crying. And I didn't loaf around. Nobody's going to accuse me of that. But you know what? I didn't do enough. And just listening to those tapes people that I've interviewed in those years at that time. And for me, the voice, the word is so sacred. And I'm right. And you know, when you listen to these tapes, let's say I was making a film. Well, first I would tape the characters, maybe one person, or maybe it's more than one in a community, whatever. And I keep telling that when I'm teaching and doing lectures often at the university level, and we have a lot of argument with teachers often because of the sound. Because the sound, I can't stand it when they say, don't worry about the sound. We tape to have the atmosphere. We're going to go back to the theater and redo it after. I can't stand that. You know, I want to kill somebody for talking like that. Because
Casuals.
when you're listening to somebody, doesn't matter, even yourself, it doesn't matter who. I'm taping some people, I'm alone. I go there with the crew. I'm going to go later on with the crew people. But I'm listening to an individual often, or perhaps sometimes it's more than one. And because of the person who's talking, doesn't have to worry, hey, is my hair do all right? Is my floor clean? Am I dressed properly? Because you're thinking, what you're going to look like on the camera, obviously. But just the thought of just talking and about whatever is important to them. I always go by that law. When a person is telling you about their life, their stories, it's incredible because the voice changes. A person who might talk about something that was very difficult in their lives, sometimes they cry, but the tone of the voice changes. It goes to the feeling of that time. So by then, you know, for years I would sometimes go back because I thought, did I understand really the story or not? And then when I think I know really what this person, how important, what's the story here? And then you go with a crew, you do your shoot, you're talking about the same subject, but you're not going to go to this person and say, could you repeat what you said? It's an insult. You know, just don't do that. But you can always go back to the first sound, which is sacred. So while the person is on the screen, you see, as an audience, you see this person on the screen talking about whatever. And then when this person is going to a certain time, you go back to your first sound. And the quality and the feeling of that is incredible. And me, I think it comes from when I was raised in Odanak, when I was a young person. We had no electricity, we had no running water. And at night, what do you think happened? We had oil lamps. And often we'd sit in the kitchen and somebody's talking about anything. And the guys in Odanak were all mostly guides in the bush for hunting and fishing. And they made canoes, and the women made baskets, and they would talk about their relations with the animals and us as children. If you had 4 or 5 kids listening to one story, who I can think of Theo, for instance, he was talking about animals like people, and he'd say, you know, this bear really embarrassed me for his behavior, and so we'd listen to this. So if you had 4 children listening to one story, you had 4 or 5 films right there, because each child would make up pictures, imagination, because we had no such thing as picture. It didn't exist. We didn't even have electricity, never mind TV or anything. It didn't exist. And so you made up the images in your mind thinking, but it was different. You had 3, 4 kids here, it's different, because each one we think it differently. And I think it really came from there, and I still think the same way, how precious and how sacred the word is for me. Just to listen to people, and believe you me, listening to the archives, I again, and I thought how precious this is. And some people, like Bill Reed, I'd forgotten I did an interview with him in 1987. And his voice is beautiful. There's no problem. It's really great. And it's his own expression of his life at that time. And it's like that. And I just encourage people who make documentary film to think about that, because it's got a lot of values.
I'm doing a cosmic horror road movie. I lost my mom. I spoke about it earlier, and to me, it was death of a cosmology. It was like, hey, I'm not going to get into why I feel the way I do, but I wanted to do a movie about that experience, losing my mom and everything she meant to me. So, to me, it was obviously an apocalypse, the end of the world. So I started really getting into cosmic horror over the I almost said over the break, over the plague. And I started working on another project called Sigil, which is another cosmic horror, God falls down and murders everybody kind of thing. But the one that I'm doing called The Old Breed is about a young Micmac girl in a post-plague undescript city, or not undescript, but I don't name the city. And she's this veteran of a civil war, and they're in the middle of a plague, and she finds out that her grandmother is dying, and her grandmother is this old matriarch with the language and the culture, and it's about her traveling from that city over this post-apocalyptic war-torn landscape to go back to her reserve to bury her grandmother. And she finds out her grandmother is this key to this ancient prophecy that's going to bring about the end of the world. So the movie ends with her making a decision as to let go of her grandmother and kind of bring about this end of the world, or try to stop it. And that's what I've been working on the past, I don't even know how long we've been in quarantine, 3 years now. But I took a year off of Blood Quantum because that movie kicked my ass, and I had the money to just sit around and goof and not do anything. So that's what I did. And then I started working on these cosmic horror projects, because to me, the existential dread that we're all kind of living under now of nuclear threats and new plagues, and it's ineffable in a classic sense. You're not going to get, that nameless dread with a guy in a hockey mask. So to me, it's cosmic horror. Plus Lovecraft and his fixation with indigenous people and ancient cultures kind of ties into what I was doing, because Micmacs have the oldest, well, not the oldest, Mayans have the oldest, but the second oldest writing system in North America. So there's all this ancient culture just sitting there waiting to be reinterpreted for summoning an old god to end the world. In my head, anyway. So that's what I'm working on now. It's called The Old Breed. The other film, or the other show that we're working on, is an animation show called The Sigil. At least that's what we're calling it now. And that's fun, because one of the things that I find being a native director, everybody expects you to do native shit. And for me, I grew up reading Conan, reading Stephen King, Clive Barker, so my imagination was all over the place. And I didn't actually start doing indigenous stuff till my 20s. Everything prior to that was fantasy, science fiction, horror. So The Sigil is just that. There's still cultural aspects, but my brain and my creativity, for the first time I feel like in my career, has been set off the leash, because I don't have to do any indigenous content. I'm still putting it in there, but it's not a priority. And I almost feel like that's the next evolution of what native art can be, where it goes from interpreting their own culture to using their own culture to interpret the culture that we all live in, the zeitgeist that we all live in, and what comes from that. And I think that's what real sharing is. And I'm excited. I was beat up after Blood Quantum, so it took a while to kind of get back on a horse, and I feel rejuvenated now. And I'm really looking forward to these cosmic horror projects, because it's pulling native cinema, native narrative into a completely new space. And that's sci-fi horror. We've done sci-fi, we've done horror, but we haven't done it together. So that's what I'm doing next. It feels like a kind of creative evolution more than a personal expression. But I wanted to focus more on not where we've been, but where we're going, because I feel like that's the next step, right? All our preoccupation now is where we've come from, like the genocide and that ugly history, to the present, where we're still kind of dealing with it. And it seems like there's this new horror every day with residential schools. So it's like, where does all this go? In my mind, Civil War, end of the world. But I think the messaging there is always going to be like a warning. Like, this is where we could go versus where this art is taking us. And that's a dichotomy, right? The reality versus our idealism. And it's weird to say that I express my idealism through horror and science fiction. I think Blood Quantum is a good example, where you have all this horror, but at the end there's like this sliver of hope, where you have this indigenous woman cradling an interracial baby and moving forward in this, new world that we're both experiencing together for the first time. And I think that was true of Rhymes for Young Ghouls too, where you found this at the end, where you effectively, or at least symbolically, toppled the residential school system. It's kind of like, where do we go from here? And the last line of that film is, what do we do now, boss? And I think the onus is put on us as creators and consumers to lift our culture into that next evolution, whatever it may be. Hopefully reconciliation. I'm a little skeptical about that, but I feel like we all have it in ourselves to elevate the art form and our lives vis-a-vis experiencing it. So I'm hopeful, even though my movies are bleak. I'm pretty hopeful. I see my son, and I know he's going to be a filmmaker, and I feel like we've done it. We've bridged those gaps where the people that are coming behind us are going to have it much easier, and it's going to be about their creativity and not about their rebellion or revolution. And that is where you're going to start seeing the real renaissance of native art, I think. And I think we're starting to see the first permutations of that now, more so in traditional art forms, but I think it's starting to cross over into film and more mainstream consumable art like television and film.
Great. That's a great open ending. And we have to wrap it. We've gone over time. Thank you so much, you two. It was wonderful.